Welcome to Deadly Night Tales. The Goblin in Crook Hole by Johan Fowler. 70 years have passed since that terrible day, but I still remember it like it had only just happened. My younger sibling Betsy was 6, and I was a boisterous 12-year-old, always getting myself into some sort of mischief. In the autumn, when the leaves started falling, we would go to the beechwood to play. There was nothing better than running through piles of golden leaves, hiding, jumping out to scare each other. That day, my school friend Tommy had come around. He was the same age as me, and we would go on adventures together. But it was a Saturday, and Betsy wanted to come, so I had to ask Mum. "Just make sure you keep a good eye on her, you two," she told us. "And make sure you're back before it gets dark. And stay away from Crook Hole, or the Goblin will get you." We laughed at that. The Goblin was just a myth to keep us from getting too close. We skipped off to the beechwood, amused by her fairy tale warning. Crook Hole was a local folklore. A collapsed limestone cave, a big hole in the ground, about 20 feet wide and 30 feet deep, full of shattered moss-covered rocks from the fallen cave roof, slippery forest debris, broken branches and rotting leaves. And it was home to the Goblin. That's what the grown-ups claimed. The Goblin that trapped and ate children who ventured inside. After about an hour of dashing about, we arrived at the hole. There was a fence around the top to stop people from falling in, but we leaned over, peering down to see if we could catch sight of the Goblin. The hole was dark and foreboding, with a cold fog clinging to the rocks and crevices, eddying over the broken ground in waves. A groaning and sometimes whistling sound emanated from its depths. Betsy was frightened, all part of the entertainment as far as Tommy and I were concerned. To one side of the hole there was a gully, with a slippery path running down. We would climb down the gully until we finally came to the rock face, with a gap in it, a crack in the rock. It was only a few inches wide. It was called the Goblin Door. It was tight for anyone but the skinniest kid to squeeze through, and Betsy was the ideal person. "Come on, Betsy," we told her. "You're little enough. Take this juicy apple and squeeze through and give it to the Goblin. Then he'll be your friend." Her face twisted into a nervous frown, but Tommy grinned at me gleefully. "But I'm frightened and I might get stuck," she sniffed. "It looks very gloomy on the other side." "Don't worry, we'll pull you out if you get stuck." We were determined to make her climb through. "And just think, if you make friends with a Goblin, he might give you a present. Gold or jewels or something," I teased. "You can become the Goblin Queen and then you'll be rich." Reluctantly, she took off her coat, tucked her jumper into her skirt and wriggled through the gap. Once she was through, I passed her the apple. "Now, call out to the Goblin," I told her. "Hello, Mr. Goblin, come out. I have an apple for you," she asked sheepishly. I can't see him. It's very spooky in here. I'm very scared," she whimpered back to us through the gap. "Go in further and call louder," Tommy shouted. "He won't hear you if you're quiet. Go on. Ask him again." She moved further into the darkness until she was out of sight. "Mr. Goblin, are you there?" Betsy was a bit louder now. "I have an apple to give you. Please come out and be my friend." Tommy and I sniggered. The mist in the hole swirled around, growing heavier with each second. That's when we heard the scream. A pitiful sound. It trailed off into the silence. We both stood, petrified for a few seconds. "Betsy, are you okay? Quick, come back to the door." We peered through the gap, but still couldn't see or hear her. For about half an hour we shouted, all the time that dreadful groaning and whistling echoing around us. Maybe the goblin was real and he'd actually taken her. The cold mist seeped through the crack in the rock and chilled us both to the bone. Running away quickly, hearts pounding and throats dry, we daren't stop until we got home. I'd never seen my mum so furious, her face as red as the apple we'd given Betsy. Dad, his fists balled and shaking, ran off to fetch the constable and anyone else who could help us look for Betsy. They sent Tommy straight home and they sent me to my room. I sat with my back to the door all night, tears streaming down my face, my whole body trembling. It was nearly dark when the search party got to Crook Hall. The constable said it was too dangerous. They would have to come back in the morning. Locked in my room, I never heard my mum cry like that before. A dreadful wail that seemed to rise from deep inside her. I pressed my hands over my ears to shut it out. The next morning they sent me to stay with my auntie for a while. The search party went back to the beech wood, but it was raining heavily and the water was flooding into the hole, so there was nothing they could do. It looked like Betsy was gone for good. I never saw my mum again. She died that winter of 1950. The flu got to her, but I think it was a broken heart. In the spring I went back to my dad, but with my mum and little sister gone, he was never the same. He'd lost weight, his face was pale with shrunken eyes, and he could barely bring himself to look at me. But I was all he had left. The following March, when winter was over, the constable and the search team went back to Crook Hall. They were accompanied by 2 cavers, who were lowered down on ropes. They found a small hole in the ground, about a foot wide, where floodwater flowed in when it was raining. They opened it up until it was big enough to climb down. 30 feet below, they found the skeletons of small children strewn across the cave floor. They were all broken, stained, and must have been there for many years. Further into the narrow cave, they found a decomposing corpse. Her legs were badly fractured. She was wearing a dirty red jumper and green skirt, so we knew it was Betsy. They reckoned she'd dragged herself away from the scattered bones and up onto a ledge to get out of the mud and debris. After they removed Betsy's body and the bones, workers covered the mouse hole and the goblin door with iron gates. No more unsuspecting children would ever again fall foul to the goblin at Crook Hall. 70 years on, I can still hear that horrible scream resounding in my head, and Betsy often visits me in my darkest hour on lonely nights. Her ghostly form materializing at the end of my bed, a little green-skinned man is holding her hand. Their eyes shine brightly and saliva drools down from their jagged teeth. "Hello, big sister," Betsy whispers. "We have a nice, juicy apple for you. Will you be our friend?" Thank you for listening to Deadly Night Tales. Please like, subscribe and follow us to help others find the show. And if you have a creepy story that you'd like a chance to have read on the show, please check the show notes for submission information. Thank you, good night, and sleep well.